Uh-huh. I just feel like I've been around the block, ripping up fantasy stock, working around the clock. Look at the view from the top. Researching rookies a lot? No, I just be listening to pods. Yeah, one in particular, I'm just a messenger. Let me just pass on the rock. Browning, brunning, pruning, pronouncing ain't what he's doing. What he's doing is not losing, but infusing you with new things. And there's Dennis the Bennett, yeah. The man is a menace, yeah. Building a dynasty, some of the finest things. Promise you, you won't regret it. Sly as a fox, cultured in pop. Give him his props. Here is a thought, here is a box. And you cannot compare them at all, so don't even try. Careful with the news, but when you use the take, I take up Tony Fire. I mean Dyer, because anyone else is a huge mistake. Whoa. Fantasy round table, fantasy round table. Yeah. Fantasy round table, come take a look at the crown, baby. Hey, fantasy round table, fantasy round table. Woo. Fantasy round table, come take a look at the crown, baby. Go.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Football Roundtable Podcast. It is Friday, and we are going to continue our previews with the second half of the AFC West. It has been an exciting week here, a lot of flying rain and ice from the sky the last few days in Colorado. Matt, Dennis, I hope things have been calmer where you are.
I had a little bit of sprinkling here, but overall, mostly it was just enough to prevent the lawn from getting mowed. No tornadoes, no hail. We had it easy.
Yeah, I mean, outside of just trying to figure out what level of hell we've been living in every day here in Texas with the heat, that's about it, Well, we talked a little bit, I think it was Monday pre-show, Matt, where it was like you wake up and it's 93 degrees outside and already at 3:30 in the morning you realize, not going to get much cooler, so might as well just get to it. So that's about it.
Well, 1 month from now, I'll be in Phoenix for a conference, so
You'll
sure
understand.
I'll explain. I'll understand oven life.
On the plus side, I guess it could be like just below there, the Mexican border, where it's 120.
I don't.
There's
know if there's that much difference.
There's not. Yeah, I mean, once you hit 105, there's really not much difference between 105 and 120. It really just all kind of
stay
just
hydrated.
try to make sure you survive. That's pretty much all I tell myself every morning. Feel like Matt, you'll know, and I can't remember the name of it. Movie Tom Hardy. That's what I feel like every day when I walk outside in Texas. Mad Max Fury Road. That's what I feel like every day. Just walk outside and
I forgot. I blocked that movie out. Not my favorite.
Oh, not bad.
No, but he does give a decent performance there. Well, it wasn't a good week for some of the NFL players either, particularly for Tyreek Hill, who is under investigation for assault once again. Matt, I'll start with you. What do you make of this news? What could this mean for the Dolphins?
I mean, obviously the Dolphins could be, I don't even know if I want to say in trouble, because I think their offense is going to be fine without him. It's obviously going to hurt if they do lose him, just because of the aspect of speed that he brings to that team, even though they have Jalen Waddle, but it's just another weapon that really helps out Tua, which I think is a big deal. But I also don't know how quick we're going to find anything out. I mean, we're still dealing with the Alvin Kamara case. That was a year and a half ago, I think. And I mean, they had video, that stuff. I mean, I remember that guy pressed charges.
February of 22.
Yeah, I mean, that guy pressed charges quickly. Maybe the only thing that speeds this up is that I guess it was in Miami, correct? It was on Father's Day that this incident happened. So maybe it speeds things up a little bit because he's in state and everything. But I mean, with sometimes with the way this stuff goes off the field, I really don't know what to think. I mean, I'm just going to say it. I think we all have kind of known Tyreek Hill is not a decent human being to begin with, so that news doesn't surprise me that he did it. If anything off the field happens, I imagine it's probably going to be something where he ends up finding a way to get it adjudicated and pays something. Or if he does end up getting charges pressed and something happen, I imagine he's going to be suspended and probably for at least 6 games. This is not his first incident. But I just don't know how quickly it's going to move because, like I said, we're still dealing with the Alvin Kamara thing, which has just been ridiculous.
Well, initially, the reports came out that there was an incident. Then it was reported the guy didn't want to press charges. And then it wasn't reported that someone pointed out to the guy that, hey, the guy that smacked you in the head has a lot of money. And now it's like, oh, he's considering pressing charges now. I suspect it's probably going to go away once Tyreek Hill puts his name to a check. It'll go away. The NFL will look at it and they'll be like, oh, it was just a misunderstanding. He didn't really hit me that hard. It was more of a playful smack on the head. Don't you know who I am? I guess he wanted to get on a boat and wasn't given permission yet. So, but Tyreek is Tyreek, and so it generates clicks and it generates news. I think it'll go away. I don't think anything becomes of it because it wasn't like the Kamara thing where Alvin and 6 people allegedly punched a guy in the face. So,
yeah, still not a good look. I do think if he ends up getting a suspension, that could be hard for Miami because they have seemingly, they're still rumored to sign Dalvin Cook. That might give them another big weapon, but it seems like this offseason they've pretty much been content to let their offense be centered around 2 players because I'm not really believing in the Robbie Anderson, Chosen Anderson resurgence. They let Gesicki go. They don't really have a dominant running back. It's kind of Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle building the offense around that. I think if you took one pretty significant piece out of that would be a little bit of a blow to them. The other piece of news, we've been waiting. We thought the Rams might sign somebody at running back. Some people thought they had cleared cap so they could get Dalvin Cook. They did not make that move, but they did bring back Sony Michel. So, Dennis, I'm imagining this isn't a huge threat to Cam Akers, but does this kind of dampen the enthusiasm for Kyren Williams and Zach Evans?
Nope. We see teams build depth, and Sony Michel at this stage of his career is a guy that, probably can't carry the ball 12 times 2 games in a row with his knee. But he's a guy that you have on your team. He's going to be good in the locker room. He's going to do things the right way. And in a pinch, he's going to go in and not make mistakes. I think Kyren Williams is still going to be serviceable as a passing down back despite his lack of athleticism. We'll see what Zach Evans does. There were a lot of people that weren't necessarily high on Evans. Cam Akers seems to be the guy there. It'll be interesting to see how it shakes out as the Rams rebuild this. But I think signing Michel is a good depth move. I mean, the Rams don't have a ton of cap space, so they're looking for quality depth anywhere they can get it at as cheap as possible.
Yeah, I agree with Dennis. It's definitely a decent depth move. He already knows the offense, knows Sean McVay, knows what's likely going to be asked of him. I mean, they've got a type. Injured running backs. That's a thing now for the Los Angeles Rams. Every single one of those 3. Even Zach Evans has had his injury issues going all the way back into college. So I think if Cam Akers ends up getting injured or misses out on carries for whatever reason, it's going to be a really intriguing duo between Sony Michel and Zach Evans splitting the ball like every other carry. He's going to run out on the field after every other carry because both of them are going to be winded and beat up. So
I feel like you've given up on Kyren Williams.
I mean, dude's been injured. He was injured all last year too. So just add him to the list.
But they only need like 2 running backs a game. So if they get 5 or 6 of them, they should have a couple per game.
The problem is just imagine. I mean, you're not wrong, but what if they're just like, oh, we only need, Cam Akers. We're going to take Cam Akers, Sony Michel, and Zach Evans into the game. We're going to bench you other 2 or not add you to the list. And they go out there and all 3 of those guys get hurt in the first quarter. I mean, what you going to do? Stafford's already beat up too. The walking wounded. So
let me ask you guys this. If you took Cooper Kupp off that team, do the Rams possibly have the worst offense?
0-17. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were asking about a record. Yes, the worst offense.
Well, I mean, your record is going to follow if you don't. In the modern NFL, if you can't put together an offense, you're having trouble.
As the famous philosopher once said, famous philosopher Jamie Tart once said, "Is Poopy that's their roster." without
Yeah,
Hooper.
because I mean they're already unironically looking at a starting wide receiver combination of Ben Skoranek and Van Jefferson again off the opposite. The only other piece of news, not really fantasy relevant, but relevant for the Jets, who a lot of people have high hopes for going into this season. Chuck Clark, who they traded for, the safety out of the Ravens, tore his ACL and is already out for the year. Not sure if you guys have any thoughts about that, but probably a blow for the Jets, especially in a competitive AFC. Well, that'll take us back into our previews. We are continuing with the West. We looked at the Chiefs and the Chargers, who finished 1-2 last year, and we will complete that AFC West with the first team up being the third place Las Vegas Raiders in 2022. They were 6-11. Their key additions, they signed Jimmy Garoppolo at quarterback. They brought in Jacoby Myers at wide receiver, DeAndre Carter at wide receiver, tight end Austin Hooper. They brought in Brian Hoyer at quarterback, Philip Dorsett at receiver, and O.J. Howard at tight end. A lot of turnover, you're thinking to yourself, and that's because among the key losses, they sent Derek Carr packing, and he signed with the Saints. Foster Moreau, the tight end, also left, signed with the Saints. Darren Waller, their tight end, was traded to the Giants. Mac Hollins, who actually had more than 90 targets last year at wide receiver, signed with the Falcons, and backup quarterback Jarrett Stidham signed with the Denver Broncos. The Raiders also made some fantasy asset moves in the draft, grabbing Notre Dame tight end Michael Mayer. They also took wide receiver Trey Tucker, quarterback Aiden O'Connell, and one of their top pick was defensive end Tyree Wilson. Fantasy assets, quarterback Jimmy Garoppolo finished as QB 25 last year. Didn't start the first couple of games of the season and missed, of course, a huge stretch at the end after he got injured and Brock Purdy took over. Josh Jacobs was incredible last year, finished as running back 3. Devontae Adams, 180 targets, 100 receptions last year, finished as wide receiver 3. Jacoby Myers was with the Patriots, but finished as wide receiver 29. Hunter Renfrow, a disappointing season, suffered a lot of injuries, actually finished as wide receiver 92 last year. Carter, who was with the Chargers, was wide receiver 63. At tight end, Austin Hooper was tight end 24 last year with the Titans before coming over as a free agent. So, Matt, I will start with you. Fantasy expectations for the Raiders. I think we have to start with, Jimmy G. Do you think he's going to play? Do you think he'll play most of the season? And do you have any concerns about Jacobs, who's a franchise tagged player and has threatened to maybe hold out?
So Jimmy G, we'll start with Jimmy G. I don't really know what to think of him. The more and more that I've looked into this foot stuff, I'm really not worried about it. It really seems like it's almost like the Kyler contract thing, where it was found out that it was put in there, dude, you got to look at the playbook, in between game sessions of Call of Duty, whatever the hell it was. So I don't think it's a big issue. I do think they put it in there because of his obvious consistent injury history. But if you go look, I imagine there's a lot of stuff in some players' contracts they probably don't want out in the open, and that just happened to get out there. What I expect from him in fantasy, I think he's probably going to be right around QB 20 to 24 again. He's a very good and consistent quarterback. He's not going to be that QB 1. And I don't expect him to even be as high as like a QB 13, 14, 15, as I know he's been at times with that San Francisco offense, because he does not have Kyle Shanahan anymore. And I don't know that while Josh McDaniels has been very successful in New England, even with having changes in pieces, changing quarterbacks, he's still, for the most part, even Mac Jones a couple years ago, I think he finished as QB like 18 or 19. It's not bad. I don't know that Jimmy G is going to be able to do that with this Raiders team. So I think the more likelihood is he finishes in that 20 to 24 range, which I think is fine for likely where you're getting him in your drafts. For Josh Jacobs, I'm not worried. So I know you mentioned franchise tag and he's holding out. Aren't the new CBA rules, if you hold out, though, you get fined a ton of money, though, do you not?
He hasn't signed his tender, so he's not under contract.
Oh, boy. I still don't think it's going to matter, as much as I hate to say that, because I don't think he's got any power in his hands, personally. He's a very good running back. I mean, he's a dude who, what did he finish? I know he was top 10. Where did he finish last year?
He was running back 3.
3. Okay. So, I mean, an amazing season. And I imagine they're going to do the same thing they did with him last year and just let it ride with him, right? We know he's not getting a lot of pass catching, but dude's an amazing running back. If he holds out, he's got to come back before week 9, or he doesn't get the accrual season. I mean, what are you going to do? Like, you can't the Raiders don't have to give you a contract. You have no leverage. It sucks that the NFL has devalued the running back position to this point. But I mean, if he wants to eventually get the accrual of an NFL season and actually get paid, he's going to have to show up and play. I don't know that he's going to be able to force the Raiders to trade him. It's not like they're the Chiefs and they're in the middle of a possible rerun for a Super Bowl, right? So, I mean, maybe if we were looking at that, it's like, oh, the Raiders have a real shot of making the playoffs and winning the Super Bowl this year. Maybe they'd force their hands a little bit to try and pay Josh Jacobs. So I think at some point he's going to come back. Would I be worried if he's my RB1 on my team and I'm counting on him to carry it? Yeah, because I wouldn't be surprised if we see, what did Melvin Gordon miss a couple years ago with the Chargers? It was a couple weeks, wasn't it, before
6.
he came back?
I believe he missed 6 games.
After Austin Eckler all of a sudden blew up and he's like, shit, maybe I should come back to work. Yeah, I don't know if that happens because I don't trust the room behind Josh Jacobs, but would I be surprised if he misses a couple games?
Is there a room behind Josh Jacobs?
There isn't. And that's why maybe that's where he thinks his leverage is at, but I just think the Raiders will just go into the season, so he'll have to come back and say, well, I don't think it'll get to that, but I do think, I guess you have to have some worry that possibly could happen.
Yeah. I mean, the option is there, but at some point, despite the fact that the league has devalued running backs have to look at the Le'Veon Bell situation and realize that they don't win when they do that. They're not. If he holds out this year, he's not getting more than $10 million a year next year. He's just not. He'll be another year older, coming off a season where he wasn't active. It doesn't benefit him. Now, can he force a trade? I don't know. Maybe they get tired of the BS. I think he's poised to have an okay year on a team that's not going to be very good. The only thing they have going for them, in my eyes, is if Jimmy G is this year's Geno Smith. Does he bounce back and have a great year? He's only played 16 games once in his career. Now, granted, the first few seasons he was a backup and wasn't going to play, but he's been injured since he's been in San Francisco, 4 out of 6 years, he's gotten injured. But there's some ability to throw the ball there. He did almost, what's that? Let's see. He's got 2 seasons of over 3,800 yards passing, 20 and 27 touchdowns in a season. And he's got one of the best receiving weapons in the game. Devontae Adams had 180 targets last year. And does it make sense to do that again? Yes. But Jacoby Myers also brings something to the table. Maybe they use the tight end with Mayer and Hooper and it becomes more effective than we guess. We know that Hunter Renfrow has a particular set of skills that he can use, and he gets open with those. Their biggest thing is that I don't know who their deep threat is, because even though Jacoby Myers can play adequately on the outside and Devontae Adams can play adequately on the outside, neither one of them have real deep speed. Adams just wins because, much like DeAndre Hopkins, he's just tougher than the cornerbacks at the catch point. He gets open. He's a real good route runner, and he gets open. It'll come down to, does Jimmy have that Geno Smith year in him this year? Maybe. I'm not counting on it, but, it doesn't look good behind him with Brian Hoyer and Aiden O'Connell. I mean, could Aiden O'Connell be this year's Davis Mills? It's not a very high bar, but
this year's Brock Purdy.
I think it's more Davis Mills. And they could still sign a running back. They could still sign Zeke or Kareem Hunt, somebody like that. They're not going to go out and sign Dalvin Cook, who still seems to be a starter in most eyes. I mean, they could sign Melvin Gordon for what it's worth. There's some guys out there that would be better backups, I think, than what they have. But I don't see if they go to Camp Hole, I don't see anything keeping Jacobs from getting 300 plus carries again.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I'm more leery of Jimmy G because it just seems like he cannot stay on the field. That's why for redraft, I have him more in a QB3 range. I think he's fine when he's there. 12 games, that might, to me, I think, if they get 12 games out of that, they have to consider that pretty successful. And that's missing 4 or 5. And that's tough when you're looking at quarterbacks. He's probably like the quintessential kind of third player you pick up on a super flex team, somebody that you need there. You mentioned Jacobs wasn't a big part of the passing game. That was true of previous seasons. Last year, he actually had 64 targets and caught 53 passes, which is a big part of why he ended up at running back 3. I think he will end up, for the reasons you guys talked about, coming back and playing under the tag and just trying to see if they'll let him go next year. It doesn't seem like he wanted to be there long term. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if the Raiders tag him this year and are happy to make some kind of changes going into next year, because I still don't know what their team identity is. But I think he could be another, RB1 season, top 10, top 12. Adams saw 180 targets last year. As we mentioned, I don't really see that changing. And there's still room for Meyer and the tight ends. Last year, the 2 tight ends, Waller and Foster Moreau, split 97 targets, which is a pretty healthy amount. Matt Collins had 94 targets. If you added up Amir Abdullah and Josh Jacobs, that was 96 targets. So there were still tons of targets going around to the running backs, to the tight ends, and to another receiver. And so I think Jacoby Myers will have a good season. The one that I'm kind of out on a little bit, especially for fantasy, is Hunter Renfrow. I thought he was poised. I thought there was potential for him to have a big role last year. It just seems like he kind of has faded down. I think them going to get Jacoby Myers and investing so heavily in they basically brought in 3 tight ends. I don't think O.J. Howard will play a lot, but you have a veteran in Austin Hooper and a pretty good rookie in Michael Mayer. I think that tells us that they're not really going to make Hunter Renfrow a focus of the offense.
The question I have is, who's the deep threat? Because as it is right now, it seems like it's going to be very compressed to the line of scrimmage.
I mean, Adams averaged 15.2 yards per reception last year.
Yeah.
He caught 1,516 yards on 100 receptions. They were bombing the ball to him quite a bit last year, actually.
Well, Derek Carr was, I guess. So we'll see. Because Adams, I don't know, he's never been known for his speed. So
maybe it's a new day of the Raiders. If you thought about Josh McDaniels' offenses with the Patriots, they didn't always bomb the ball down the field a ton either.
I don't think you need to bomb it down there a ton. You just need somebody that's capable of pulling the defense back to make those short area routes work, or it gets real congested with defenders.
I mean, they didn't really do that a lot with Jimmy G in San Francisco either. Yeah. I would imagine it's actually going to end up being Myers, would be my guess. I don't think they want to use Adams as the guy to clear out the defense. Adams will be working in some way to get the ball.
Or Keelan Cole, they'll slot him in there. I mean, he averaged over 14 yards of reception, didn't catch the ball a whole lot, but they fired it down there. So, Dennis, I'll start with you. What do you think is the best fantasy value for the Raiders?
The best fantasy value. So, looking where Devontae Adams is going in the Dynasty Nerds ADP startup, he's going as wide receiver 17. So that's low to me. I know he's what, 30 years old now. That's despite that, and despite the questionable quarterback situation, I still think wide receiver 17 is a steal. And then if you're looking for like dirt cheap, Jacoby Myers is going as wide receiver 59 And if you can get him as the QB2 of the Raiders on a team that may very well be behind frequently and having to throw, even with Adams getting 175 targets, Jacoby Myers should get good enough volume to be a wide receiver 3. And at wide receiver 59 value, I think that's, it's hard to pass up. I've started drafting him in my underdog drafts. I'm targeting him late.
Yeah, I like that call. I think Devontae Adams, at least in my opinion, is still a top wide receiver in the game. He's not in the discussion for a wide receiver 1 anymore, unfortunately. But or the wide receiver 1. I'm sorry, with JJ, with Jets and Jamar Chase. But I still think he is a phenomenal wide receiver. For me, it's got to be Michael Mayer. I mean, you just talked about, Matt, all the vacated targets and how much Darren Waller and who is the other tight end? I apologize.
Foster Moreau.
I had Darren Waller's ranks up last year what he was. I mean, 84 points last year in his 9 games, still finished as a top 24 tight end, 31 in PPR. They target the tight end a fair amount. And I mean, just going all the way back to his time in New England where they have done that. And Michael Mayer right now, according to Fantasy Pros, is coming off the board at 172 overall, the 23rd tight end. I know if you lived or you pay a lot of attention to the Devy community or the college side of things, there's been a lot of talk about Michael Mayer the past couple of years being a round 1 tight end. A lot of people were shocked he fell into the 2nd round, but still, this is an amazing spot for him. I think he's going to be extremely good. I think he's much better than Austin Hooper, although I've compared his skill set to Austin Hooper at times. I do think he's a little bit more explosive. I think he's a much better blocker than Austin Hooper is as well. He was easily one of the best blocking tight ends in this class. He also brings, obviously, that offensive upside. I think he's an absolute steal. I think he's going to start from day 1 with the Raiders. And Matt, you mentioned, and I'm with you. I don't know that Hunter Renfrow is going to come back and occupy that short area space. So I feel like Michael Mayer, while he ends up probably being the 3rd option at times in this offense behind Devontae Adams and behind Jacoby Myers, maybe even the 4th at times behind Hunter Renfrow, he's likely going to be doing the same thing against the opposing defenses. And the one thing I will give Michael Mayer is he's extremely smart. He knows where to sit down in the holes in coverage, and he knows how to create separation. We've seen even going back to San Francisco as well, Jimmy G was never afraid to target that tight end. I think if Michael Mayer is consistently able to get open, I would not be surprised if he has a really good season for them. So he would be my steal for the Raiders.
Yeah, and I think that's a decent call. 97 targets for Moreau and Waller combined. Moreau actually had more targets because he played more of the games, got 54 targets, turned it into 33 for 420 and 2 touchdowns. I think Mayer's better than that. I think Hooper, is a decent veteran, but we've seen him kind of getting a little bit older. I thought if there was a chance for him to explode, it was going to happen last year in Tennessee where they fundamentally had no receivers. For me, I'm going to circle back and go with Jacoby Myers. I think there's a reason they targeted him and went and got him. That's somebody that Josh McDaniels is very familiar with, having worked with him in New England. And last year, we kept expecting it was, like a short run thing, wasn't going to keep going. But Matt Collins, who they put in that wide receiver 2 role, journeyman guy, saw 94 targets. He got 57 for 690 and 4 touchdowns. I think Myers is better than that. I wouldn't be surprised if Myers saw 10 to 20 more targets than that. Probably could be another receiver that goes over 100 targets in there. He was very productive with a poor New England offense around him. And guess what? He's not getting any double coverage with Devontae Adams out there, with Josh Jacobs running the ball. He could be a guy that really thrives slotting into a situation where he's definitely not going to be the focal point of a defense. I think that brings us to the last question for the Raiders. And Matt, I will start with you. How do you think they finish?
Oh boy. Not great, Bob. Not great. I mean, so when we did this Monday, I just like to go through the schedule and look at the games and say, okay, what's losable? What's losable? For the Raiders, I probably should have gone what's winnable, because what's losable is probably about 14 or 15 games. It's not pretty. The amount of teams that they play out of conference that are like legitimate teams sucks for them. The Colts, who They play them the second to last week of the season. I mean, even if Anthony Richardson starts, you would think he's probably getting into his groove at that point. He's been playing in a lot of games again, rushing upside. They obviously get the Chargers and the Chiefs twice. They get the Vikings this year, the Dolphins, the Jets with Aaron Rodgers, the Lions, the Bears, the Patriots, the Packers, the Steelers, and the Bills. Like, it's a tough schedule. I think at best you're looking at like a 3-14 type season. Maybe they get to 4 wins. I don't know. I think that they're going to be in for probably competing for one of the top draft picks in 2024.
Yeah, I have them going 4-13. I got them getting wins. I got them, pulling out a win at home against the Broncos, and a win at home against the Chargers, just in fluke games. Green Bay at home early and the Steelers at home early. I don't see them winning anything on the road. And if they lose all 4 of those games, I will not be surprised. I was just looking for like, where might they be able to pull something out? And at home, they're gonna try, but it's not looking like a good season. 4-13 is where I have them.
Yeah, the Raiders won 6 games last year, and that might be optimistically about the top of the range again for me. I think they're probably a 5 to 7 win team. I don't know if I think they're quite as bad as Dennis, but I still don't think they're very good. You guys know, everyone that's listened to the show for any point in time knows that Josh McDaniels is not my favorite coach, and I think there's a bad energy there. Josh Jacobs doesn't seem too pumped that he got franchise tagged. Almost every comment we get from Devontae Adams this offseason makes it seem like he's not too pumped to still be there. I wouldn't be surprised if there are some big changes for the Raiders this offseason. Well, that brings us to the last team for the AFC West, and that's Denver Broncos, who finished last in the AFC West last year. They had a 5-12 record in 2022. Their key additions, they brought in Jarrett Stidham to be a backup quarterback. They brought in Samaje Perine to give them a backup running back. They brought in Marquez Callaway at wide receiver. Big signings were probably Mike McGlinchey at right tackle and Ben Powers at guard, and then they went and got the Chiefs' Frank Clark at outside linebacker. So some interesting moves inside the division. Among their losses, their former backup quarterback, Brett Rippon, actually went to the Rams. Mike Boone, who was part of that running back room, went to the Texans. Chase Edmonds went to the Buccaneers, and Latavius Murray went to the Bills, kind of a cleaning out of the running back room. Their longtime kicker, Brandon McManus, was released. He was the last person on the roster who was on the Super Bowl 50 winning team. He is now with the Jaguars. And defensive end Draymond Jones went to the Seahawks. Among the rookies they didn't have a first-round pick, but they went and picked up Oklahoma receiver Marvin Mims in the second round, and they got an interesting linebacker in Drew Sanders. Fantasy assets, a quarterback, it's all about Russell Wilson and whether new coach Sean Payton can get him turned around. He was quarterback 16 last year. Devontae Williams was running back 82 last year, missed almost all the season after tearing his ACL in the 4th game. Samaje Perine was actually a running back 34 for the Bengals last year, pretty solid addition. And in the wide receiver room, Jerry Jeudy was wide receiver 22, and Cortland Sutton, who missed a few games, was wide receiver 43. They also returned veteran Tim Patrick. We have veteran KJ Hamler, who was wide receiver 141 last year. I'm surprised he even made it that high. I did not remember him being in more than one game last year. He has battled injuries his entire career. Callaway was wide receiver 126 for the Saints last year, and then they have Marvin Mims. At tight end, Greg Dulcich was an interesting addition last year, a 3rd-round selection, finished as tight end 29, played about half the games. Adam Troutman comes over from the New Orleans Saints, was tight end 49, and Albert O, tight end 70 last year. They almost forgot he was on the roster. So Dennis, we'll start with you. What are your fantasy expectations for the Broncos? Do you think that Sean Payton can get Russ cooking again?
Yeah, I like the combination. Russ needs a coach that I think wields some respect in the locker room. For whatever reason, Nathaniel Hackett just did not get it in Denver, and it didn't seem like he just wasn't going to. Sean Payton comes in. He's won a Super Bowl. He's coached a Hall of Fame quarterback. He's ran great offenses. He isn't going to take a whole bunch of crap from anybody. So I feel like he's going to put Russell in a situation to be successful. In Dynasty Nerds ADP, he's going off at QB 23. I get it. He's 33, 34 years old, but I still think he's got 3 or 4, maybe 5 years ahead of him. And
he is 34.
I think, okay, maybe 3 to 4 years. I think Peyton is going to get him back to that, QB 9 to 12 range. Russ doesn't run like he used to. And, and maybe Sean lets him cook a little bit more. I know that was the issue in Seattle. He wanted, Pete Carroll didn't trust him either because Pete didn't think he could carry a team, or just Pete's proclivity to want to run the ball all the time. So I think we got Javonte Williams coming off an injury, and Samaje Perine is a good backup. There's talk Cortland Sutton is going to be the Michael Thomas, and Greg Dulcich is going to be the Jimmy Graham. We can't keep living in the past. Can some of those plays work? Maybe, but I don't think we're going to see Cortland Sutton get the volume that Michael Thomas did. Like if those two guys are playing, like who the hell is Jerry Jeudy then? I don't remember who New Orleans had that fit that role, and was it even relevant? So I don't think it's going to be as narrow a funnel as some fantasy managers hope. In part just because I think Jeudy and Patrick, Marvin Mims, Dulcich, and then Williams and Perine, there's a lot of weapons there. And so I don't think we're going to have that wide receiver that puts up the wide receiver one season. I think Jeudy and Sutton could push for wide receiver 2 numbers. It'll depend on if Peyton lets Russ cook a little bit and Russ doesn't turn the ball over, then there's some potential there. I'm unsure about the tight end. I don't think I trust any of the guys at the tight end position to draft them very high. Troutman and Alberto, aren't anything. And Dulcich is a guy that if I'm building a team and I punt the tight end position, Dulcich right now is one of those guys where I want a team with like 2 other guys in the same range. So I can kind of see, does one of them shake out and become a consistently viable fantasy asset?
It's going to be a very interesting team to watch because Sean Payton, through like 2013 to I think it was 2019, was incredible. And 2 of those years were with Jameis Winston. The rest of that time was with one Drew Brees, where his fantasy finishes were QB6, QB9, QB8, QB3. Before Jameis Winston came in and did finish QB3, but then I think he was injured the year after that because I couldn't even find a New Orleans quarterback that finished with a decent point percentage. To go all the way back to that, so the wide receiver you were looking for, Dennis, was you guys probably won't be surprised when you hear the name. I forgot that he was the one for them for a while. So for 1 year, their highest scoring one, that very first year I mentioned where Drew Brees finishes QB6, their best wide receiver was Marquise Colston, who finished at wide receiver 36. It was split between him and Kenny Stills. But then after that, they had one wide receiver who just dominated every single year. For 2 years in a row, it was one Brandon Cooks. Wide receiver 13, and then it switched to Michael Thomas, which I'm pretty sure was when Brandon Cooks had been traded at that point, where he went wide receiver 7, 6, 6, 1, obviously, and then we get into – go ahead.
I was looking more for, like, who was the secondary wide receiver.
So I'm going to let you know right now, looking at their things, the secondary wide receiver did not matter. Right. Yeah, that's the whole thing. So
that was the point I was making.
What I'm curious to find out,
that's the perfect role for Jerry Jeudy, though.
Yeah. So that my interesting part in that is you have to go all the way back to 2015 to find a year where 2 wide receivers did anything. Now, neither one of those guys did a lot for fantasy when it comes to Marquise Colston. Kenny Stills, I believe, finished as wide receiver 47. So they were both grouped in a similar range, and neither one of them had massive standout seasons. Marquise Colston 902 yards, and Kenny Stills had 931. The big recipient that year that ran the offense was one tight end, Jimmy Graham, who had 889 receiving yards, but 10 touchdowns. That's where he really dominated and finished as tight end 1 on the season. I don't know if that's the offense we're going to, where we're going to see maybe 3 fantasy assets, only 1 really good and then 2 kind of good, which I would hope is what we're going to see with the talent on this offense. Or are we going the Brandon Cooks, Michael Thomas, New Orleans Saints type offense, where there's one guy who's dominating and going to finish as like a top 6 to 10 wide receiver, and then the other guys are at best wide receiver 3s. I think that's the route we're probably going to go, but I wouldn't be surprised if it is more the 2013 offense, because I don't know that Russ can cook personally. We saw his best years in Seattle, and I want to say it was this show we talked a lot about it. It may not. I do a lot of podcasts, so I don't remember exactly where I talked about this. But if you go back to the years that he's had his best seasons, it really is when he has a very good run game paired with his passing attack. When he is asked to just fling it out, that one year in Seattle, he was great for the first half, and then he had a massive drop-off. And it seems every time they ask him to just air the ball out, he eventually has some kind of massive drop-off. Denver has a good running game. I expect them to go more toward that kind of offense. So I really don't know what to think of this team. Russ is a quarterback I'm willing to buy into, especially because of his price. But I really don't feel comfortable taking any of these weapons. To be honest with you, I might just take the cheapest one and hope that they get me some kind of points in the week that I need to start them, but not really plan on having them as part of my starting lineup.
So I was very excited about the potential for Denver last year, and then between the injuries that they kind of started to form even in the pre-season, and me realizing that Nathaniel Hackett was probably going to usurp the last coach we just mentioned as the least effective head coach I've ever seen for the Denver Broncos, it kind of went off the rails. But you started to see a little bit of that promise actually the last 2 weeks of the season. Nathaniel Hackett was fired after just a deplorable Christmas Day beatdown at the hands of a pretty, I was making fun of the Rams offense earlier in the show, but that same offense minus Cooper Kupp absolutely destroyed Denver on national television. So they fired Nathaniel Hackett, and when he was fired, they put in a different offensive coordinator. And where do you think Russell Wilson finished for those 2 games?
QB2.
He was QB1 or 2. I don't know. He finished high.
He was QB1.
Yeah.
He was QB1. He and these were games that came against the Chiefs and the Chargers, who were both teams that were tracking toward the playoffs. He had his 2 by far best games of the season and looked like a completely different player. And honestly, the offense looked completely different. And that's part of what gives me hope. It's not just Sean Payton. It's that we actually saw last year, even pre-Sean Payton, that just moving on from whatever was going on with Hackett made that team a lot stronger. I have questions on their offense about Williams. Denver has released a whole bunch of running backs that they had in their running back room the last few weeks. They're down to like only 5 guys at the position, which should make me feel better that Javonte Williams is going to be ready to go week 1. I'm still not 100% sure, but I liked the addition of Samaje Perine, and they seem to be really high on Tony Jones, who played for Peyton in New Orleans. So, I'm excited to see Javonte Williams back. I love this wide receiver group. I think there's actually a real decent chance that neither Albert O or KJ Hamler make the final roster in looking at all the positions that they have and all the things they need to fill. That's kind of how deep the wide receiver group is going. I'm very excited to get Tim Patrick back this year. I think that was a huge missing piece last year too. He is one of the best stabilizing presence on the team and in the room. That was something that multiple people have talked about on their offense. There's been a lot of great reports about Cortland Sutton studying Michael Thomas footage and how happy that's made Sean Payton. I don't know I'm like you. I don't know what to make of Sutton and Judy and Patrick all coming back. I liked what I saw, pieces from Greg Dulcich. He struggled a little bit with health. So I think they have a lot of interesting ingredients, but I think there are a lot of people that have gotten really excited about the potential of all these incredibly high fantasy assets. And I'm more of the opinion that, I think, Matt, you were the one that called out the 2013 year. I think it's more likely Denver has two wide receiver 2-3-ish players than has a one Michael Thomas dominating player, because all those guys have struggled to manage to stay on the field for 17 games too. I since we have had Sutton, Patrick, and Judy, I think that I read somewhere they've only played like 12 games together, and that's over 3 or 4 years. One of them always, first it was Sutton, then Judy missed a whole bunch of time. Last year it was Patrick. It's like I almost feel like Kevin Costner in Draft Day. At one time, I would like to see the team that I have on the freaking field. I'm excited to watch Denver. There is such a wide range of outcomes for their fantasy prospects. I'm hopeful Russ goes back to being a low-end quarterback one, and that we can get some decent wide receiver 2-3 production from a couple of those guys, and maybe a low-end running back one in Javonte Williams. But I need to see it a little bit first. I am very excited. Denver finally invested in rebuilding its line, getting Powers from the Ravens and McGlinchey at right tackle, getting Garrett Bowles back and Quinn Miners at the other guard. I actually feel like Denver's line will be better, which might help a lot of things.
It seems like, looking at their depth chart, it looks like the Saints did – one thing they did is they added Marquez Callaway, Adam Troutman, and Tony Jones. And what do they all have in common? They all played for Sean Payton in New Orleans, and so they can help each of those respective rooms learn Sean Payton's offense. That being said, based on his history, you're going to only want one wide receiver. I don't know which one it is yet.
You never know.
Yeah.
Matt, what do you think the best fantasy value is?
It's a good question. I'm going to stick at the wide receiver position, and maybe I'm hoping and wishing too much here with this one, but Tim Patrick, coming off the board as a 207th player overall, I think is a massive value for a guy who, before the ACL tear, there was a lot of talk that he might have been the best wide receiver on that team last year, or what they expected him to be on that team last year. He was getting a lot of hype and a lot of love. I took him in a lot of places thinking he was going to jump up, possibly be that wide receiver too. Matt, you talked about it all the time. Everybody was out there hyping up Jerry Jeudy, and it was Tim Patrick who was going out there just being extremely consistent. What worries me is obviously completely new coach, completely new coaching staff, completely new system. So maybe Tim Patrick gets buried there. But you're paying a pretty high price for Jerry Jeudy. In fact, Tim Patrick is the fourth out of those 4 wide receivers coming off the board. Even rookie Marvin Mims is going ahead of him. And I get it. They did draft him. Well, he was a second-round pick, right, Matt? Or was he a third round?
Tim Patrick?
No.
Mims was a second round.
Okay, yeah. So I understand that Peyton and the coaching staff wanted him. You draft someone in the second round, you clearly like the player. Excuse me. He is a rookie, though. It takes time sometimes for these rookies to get integrated in the system. While I know Tim Patrick is coming back from an ACL, we're almost to a point where he's been back for a full year. He tore it right at the beginning of preseason. So I am going to bet on Tim Patrick. Like I said, it's one of those offenses where I'm fine taking the running backs. I'm even fine betting on Russ Wilson because of his value. Wide receivers, I'm just taking the cheapest one, and right now the cheapest one is Tim Patrick.
Yeah, I don't disagree with the sentiment. It's just that Patrick's going to be 30 years old when the season starts. He is coming off the injury. And based on Peyton's history of only having really one fantasy relevant receiver, I don't know that Patrick feels like a guy that that is going to wear the better for best ball tag. In Dynasty Nerds ADP, Cortland Sutton's coming off at wide receiver 55 and Jerry Jeudy's at wide receiver 22. So I'm going to bet on Sutton with those numbers. Maybe he ends up being Michael Thomas. Maybe he doesn't. But at that point, it seems like he's pretty cheap. And then Russell Wilson, because of his age, he's dropped down. And I think Russ is going to bounce back. He's likely to be the big winner in all of this. Samaje Perine is a real good pass-catching back. Javonte Williams is a good pass-catching back. And the tight ends and wide receivers, you know what? Drew Brees threw for 5,000 yards, and 40 touchdowns, I think. So Brees put up a ton of passing yards. And if Russell Wilson can assimilate that offense in the manner that Drew Brees did, it's easy for me to say. Russ could be this year's Geno Smith.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of interesting ones to me. Part of me is very interested in Samaje Perine. He's currently going off at running back 35, which isn't that far off of where he finished last year. And if, say, for the first month of the season, he's their primary back, you could see him finishing a little bit better than that. That's just me not being totally willing to believe all the incredibly optimistic reports about Williams. You're right about Patrick. He actually tore his ACL in training camp. He never even made it to the preseason, so he's just about up to the 1 year mark. So the only advantage of tearing your ACL in the off season or the training camp is that you should be ready to go and even get a full off season workouts. He is still the one. I'm the one that has said before, I think Tim Patrick is their best wide receiver. He has an intangible that neither Sutton or Jeudy has, and that is heart, and that is tenacity and grit. In his last 2 seasons that he was available in 2020, where he predominantly had Drew Lock and his wild inconsistency as his quarterback, he saw 79 targets, caught 51 of them for 742 yards and 6 touchdowns. The next season, where it was predominantly, Teddy Dumpoff as his quarterback, he saw 85 targets, caught 53 of them for 734 yards and 5 touchdowns. Those may not sound like eye-popping numbers, but that is the reason he got a long-term contract before they signed Sutton to a long-term contract, because they saw him out there working hard every day. And those were actually very impressive seasons considering the pitiful offense we saw from Denver those couple of years. And I think he's poised to bounce back big. I'm very excited to see him again. I missed him a lot last year. And you're right, he's coming off as wide receiver 90 right now. I think even if either a Sutton or a Jeudy ends up being a higher scorer, I think he's going to well outperform that ADP, and it's going to end up being a guy that you can play as a flex play every week. So that's my pick. Last question. We'll start with Dennis. Where do you think the Broncos finish this year?
I believe in Sean Payton. I don't think they're going to take a huge jump, but I think they're going to be better. I gave him 9-8.
So I've got I feel insane to say this when I was looking at it. There's like 6 games on here I think are possibly losable for the Broncos. One of them might be a little bit biased, just saying. But, I mean, you've got obviously the Chargers and Chiefs, both very good teams. I have them splitting those. Dolphins will be a tough team. I still think the Jets are going to be a tough team to beat. I really think Aaron Rodgers is going to be good for them. You've got the Bills, the Vikings, and then the Lions, and then, of course, the mighty Cleveland Browns. If they split with the Chargers and Chiefs, I think that they can honestly dominate the rest of the schedule. They get the Raiders twice. That should be 2 easy wins for the Denver Broncos. You get the Texans, should be an easy win for the Denver Broncos. The New England Patriots, maybe not an easy win, but should be a win for the Denver Broncos. The Bears are an interesting challenge, but a team they should beat. They should beat the Washington Commanders. They beat the teams they're supposed to beat. There's a realistic shot that they're like 10-7. I had them at 11-6. I have been going based off what the games I think they could lose, and I have 6 marked down as games that I think they'll lose. So I think they're going to finish 10 or 7, 11-6, which should put them right in the thick of a playoff.
Yeah, the thing I'll say about the Jets game is in Denver, and do you remember who their offensive coordinator is? I don't know if you've ever experienced the wrath of the Broncos fans.
I don't know. The Jets offensive coordinator?
Is Nathaniel Hackett.
Oh, is it? Oh, I don't know. I've been pumping up Aaron Rodgers and Garrett Wilson all summer.
Hackett was fine with Rodgers in Green Bay, and he may be fine there just being an offensive.
So you mean the offensive play caller is actually Aaron Rodgers in New York? My bad. I misunderstood you. You brought it. Yeah, Nathaniel Hackett is there. I get it. Yeah, name and title. Gotcha.
There's going to be. I don't know if you remember what it was like when Brock came back with the Texans to play against. It was savage. I expect if that was in New York, maybe I would give that one to you. But that will actually, I don't feel good about for the Jets' health in that game. I have Denver probably 10 or 11 wins too. It's hard because I feel like you. I think they had all the pieces in place. I really feel like their record last year. They lost a lot of really inconceivably close games last year too, and only inconceivable until you realize their coach just was not a professional coach. I mean, after 2 weeks, they went and hired him a game manager, which was probably not a good sign for us. So I think you see every year a team where they have a little bit of competence injected into the organization, and it makes a big difference in terms of a pretty sizable record jump. Winning 10 games would give them 5 more than they had last year, which seems pretty sizable, but I also think seems doable given schedule and things like that. But we will see. It's hard for me because I was optimistic last year. I was excited about Denver, and they just sucked the life out of me before we got to October. So we'll check back October 1st and see if I'm still sad on the inside.
Well, we're all picking a winning season for them, Matt. So you got that to look forward to.
I think we all picked a winning season for them last year. Again, let's check back October 1st. See if I have sackcloth and ashes on top of my Broncos shirt. Well, that'll do it for us for today and for the AFC West. We will stay in the West, but transition to the NFC next week, starting on Monday with the San Francisco 49ers and the Seattle Seahawks. Over the weekend, if you're looking for some ways to fill up your time, Dennis, what can the people do?
Nothing goes better with mowing the lawn than a set of headphones and the Fantasy Football Roundtable podcast. Download, subscribe, listen, rate, review. Help us help you.
Well, that'll do it for us today. We will see you on Monday.